The sledgehammer crashed through the concrete as Sarah demolished her own pool, tears streaming down her face. She thought removing the place where her daughter drowned would bring peace, until Karen's shrill voice cut through the morning air. "I'm calling the police. You're destroying property values." But Karen had no idea that Sarah's demolition would uncover something buried beneath the pool deck 20 years ago, something that would make Karen wish she'd never made that call. Sarah Martinez raised the sledgehammer above her head, her arms trembling not from the weight but from the finality of what she was about to do. The pool that had once been the centerpiece of countless birthday parties, summer barbecues, and lazy Sunday afternoons now looked like a concrete grave in the pale morning light. "Just do it," she whispered to herself, the same words she'd repeated like a mantra for the past 3 months. Ever since the accident. Ever since Emma. The hammer came down with a thunderous crack that split the silence of Maple Street like a gunshot. A spider web of fractures radiated from the impact point, and Sarah felt something break inside her chest, not from pain, but from a strange, unexpected relief. She raised the hammer again. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. Sarah didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Karen Henley stood at the property line, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair gleaming in the early sunlight, her manicured hands planted firmly on her hips. Even at 7 in the morning, she was dressed like she was heading to a board meeting, crisp white blouse, navy blazer, and that expression of perpetual disapproval that had terrorized the neighborhood for over a decade. Sarah kept her back, turned and raised the hammer again. "I'm removing my pool, Karen. On my property. With my own hands. You can't just," Karen's voice pitched higher, that familiar shriek that made dogs bark 3 blocks away. "There are procedures. Permits. You're going to destroy everyone's property values." The hammer came down again, harder this time. Another satisfying crack echoed through the air. Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of concrete dust across her skin. "I don't care about your property values." "Well, I do." Karen's voice was reaching dog whistle frequencies now. "I have a right to protect my investment. This is a respectable neighborhood." Sarah finally turned around, and Karen actually took a step back. Sarah knew she looked like hell. She'd been looking like hell for months. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face was gaunt from weeks of barely eating, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything that mattered. "Respectable," Sarah repeated, her voice flat. "Is that what you call it when you complain about an 8-year-old girl splashing too loudly in her own pool?" Karen's face flushed red. "I never." "You called the Homeowners Association 6 times last summer about excessive noise during quiet hours." "Quiet hours, Karen. It was 3 in the afternoon. There are rules." "She's dead, Karen." The words came out like stones, heavy and final. "Emma's dead. She drowned in this pool 3 months ago while I was inside making her a sandwich. So excuse me if I don't give a damn about your property values." The color drained from Karen's face, but her jaw remained set in that stubborn line Sarah had come to despise. "I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't give you the right to what? To tear down my own pool on my own property." Sarah's voice was rising now, months of grief and rage finally finding a target. "To do whatever I want with the place where my daughter died. You need permits. You need professional contractors. You can't just take a sledgehammer to concrete and expect, watch me." Sarah turned back to the pool and swung the hammer with everything she had. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, but she didn't care. Each blow was a release, a way to channel the fury that had been eating her alive since the day she'd found Emma floating face down in the shallow end. "That's it." Karen's voice cracked like a whip. "I'm calling the police." Sarah paused mid-swing. "For what?" "Disturbing the peace. Destruction of property. Operating without permits. Public nuisance. It's 7 in the morning, Karen. And it's my property." "Not anymore, it's not." Karen was already pulling out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. "Hello, yes, I need to report a disturbance." A woman is destroying property with a sledgehammer, and I'm concerned for public safety. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. Public safety. That's rich coming from someone who tried to get a playground removed because children were too loud. Karen pressed the phone closer to her ear, speaking in that sickeningly sweet voice she reserved for authority figures. Yes, officer, she's being very aggressive. I'm genuinely concerned for my safety and the safety of the neighborhood. You want to see aggressive, Karen? Sarah raised the hammer again, and this time she didn't hold back. The blow landed with such force that a chunk of concrete the size of a dinner plate broke free and skidded across the patio. Karen actually shrieked and stumbled backward. She's completely out of control. Karen shouted into the phone. Yes, I'll stay on the line until they arrive. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah worked in a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Swing, crack, breathe. Swing, crack, breathe. Each impact loosened another piece of the concrete shell, and with it, another piece of the weight that had been crushing her chest since Emma's funeral. She was so focused on the work that she didn't hear the police cruiser pull up to the curb. It wasn't until Officer Martinez, no relation, despite the shared name, cleared his throat that she realized she had an audience. I'm Officer Martinez with the Riverside Police Department. We received a complaint about a disturbance. Sarah straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans. Officer Martinez was young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and the sort of mustache that suggested he took his job seriously but wasn't looking for trouble. Behind him stood his partner, an older woman with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who'd seen it all. I'm removing my pool, Sarah said simply. On my property. With my own tools. Officer Martinez said gently, I understand. This is your property, but we need to make sure everything's being done safely and legally. There's nothing unsafe about it, Sarah shot back. I'm not using power tools. I'm not disturbing anyone except, she gestured toward Karen, who was hovering near the property line like a vulture. The issue, the older officer said, stepping forward, is that you might need permits for this kind of work. Pools are considered permanent structures, and removing them usually requires what? Sarah's voice was getting sharp again. Usually requires that I pay thousands of dollars to watch some stranger tear down the place where my daughter died. Usually requires that I fill out forms and wait for inspections while I have to look at that thing every day from my kitchen window. Officer Martinez exchanged a look with his partner. We are very sorry for your loss. But we still need to make sure what? That I'm not hurting anyone. That I'm not breaking any laws. I'm on my own property, using my own tools, removing my own pool. What law am I breaking? Karen stepped forward, her phone still clutched in her hand like a weapon. She's disturbing the peace. She's been out here making noise since dawn. It's 7:30 in the morning, Sarah said. Construction crews start work at 7. Garbage trucks start at 6. Hell, your husband starts his leaf blower at 6:45 every Saturday. That's different. How is it different, Karen? How is it different except that you don't like me? The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable, his partner looked tired, and Karen looked like she was about to explode. Officer Martinez said finally, I'm going to need to ask you to stop work until we can sort this out. Sarah stared at him. Sort what out? The permit situation. If you need permits for this kind of work, I don't need permits to remove my own pool. Actually, the older officer said, consulting a small notebook, you might. Pool removal often requires permits because it involves utility lines, drainage, and potentially hazardous materials. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Hazardous materials? Well, depending on when the pool was built, there might be asbestos in the concrete or lead in the plumbing. And then there's the issue of what you're planning to do with the space afterward. I'm planning to fill it in and plant grass. That's still going to require permits, Karen said smugly. You need soil permits, grading permits, possibly environmental impact studies. Sarah's voice was climbing toward hysteria. For planting grass. If you're changing the drainage patterns of the property, yes, the older officer said. Look, I understand you're going through a difficult time, but the law is the law. Sarah looked at the hammer in her hands, then at the small crater she'd managed to create in the concrete. After 3 hours of backbreaking work, she'd barely made a dent. And now they were telling her she couldn't even do that much. So what you're saying, she said slowly, is that I can't remove the pool where my daughter drowned because I don't H. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her in the pre-dawn darkness. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the windows, every distant car engine seemed amplified in the silence. But it wasn't the house. Keeping her awake, it was the image of that metal glinting in the morning sunlight, buried beneath 23 years of concrete and lies. At 4 a.m., she gave up pretending to sleep and crept downstairs to the kitchen. Through the window, she could see the pool in the backyard, that small crater she'd made standing out like a wound in the concrete. The officers had made her cover it with a tarp and some boards, for safety reasons, but Sarah knew it was really to keep her from investigating further. She made coffee with trembling hands and tried to think rationally. There could be dozens of explanations for metal buried under a pool. Rebar, old pipes, construction debris. Just because it was shiny didn't mean it was. What? What did she think it was? Sarah pulled out her laptop and started searching. Jenny Anderson missing Riverside 2001. The first result made her stomach drop. Local teen still missing after 2 years. The article was from 2003, accompanied by a school photo of a girl with dark hair and a shy smile. 16 years old. Last seen walking home from her job at the ice cream shop on Maple Street. The same Maple Street where Sarah now lived. Sarah clicked through article after article. The search for Jenny Anderson had dominated local news for months. Police had searched the woods behind the high school, dragged the river, questioned classmates and co-workers. They'd found nothing. No body, no evidence, no trace of where she'd gone. The last article was from 2005, Anderson family moves away, vows to keep searching. Jenny's parents had sold their house and moved to Oregon, still hoping for answers that never came. Sarah stared at the screen until her eyes watered. Then she searched for something else, 2450 Maple Street property records. Her house had been built in 2002, exactly 1 year after Jenny Anderson disappeared. The lot had been empty before that, just an old foundation and some overgrown landscaping where the Anderson family home had stood until it was torn down in 2001. The same year Jenny disappeared. Sarah's hands were shaking as she clicked through the construction permits. The pool had been installed in July 2002, during the original construction. Which meant whatever was buried under there had been put there before the concrete was poured. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." Sarah dropped the phone like it had burned her. It clattered across the kitchen floor, the screen cracking against the tile. She stared at it for a long moment, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Someone was watching her. Someone knew she'd found something. She retrieved the phone with shaking hands and took a screenshot of the message before it could disappear. Then she called the police. Riverside Police Department, this is dispatch. I need to report a threatening text message, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you in immediate danger? I don't know. Maybe. I found something buried in my backyard yesterday and now someone's threatening me. There was a pause. Found something. What kind of something? I'm not sure. But I think it might be connected to Jenny Anderson. Another pause, longer this time. Can you hold for a moment? Sarah waited, listening to the hold music and trying to control her breathing. Outside, she could see the first hint of dawn creeping across the sky. In a few hours, the neighborhood would wake up, and Karen would be at her window, watching. Waiting. This is Detective Rivera. I understand you received a threatening message. Yes. Someone told me to stop digging or I'd regret it. And you mentioned Jenny Anderson. I found something metal buried under my pool yesterday. I looked her up and she disappeared the year before my house was built. Before the pool was installed. Detective Rivera was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't go outside, don't touch anything in your yard, and don't talk to anyone about this until I get there. Can you do that? How long will that take? 20 minutes. Maybe less. Sarah hung up and wrapped her arms around herself. The kitchen suddenly felt too exposed, too vulnerable. She moved to the living room and positioned herself where she could see both the front door and the backyard through the windows. That's when she noticed the car. It was parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Sarah had never seen it before, and in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's vehicles, that was unusual. As she watched, she thought she saw movement inside, a shadow shifting behind the windshield. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. I said stop. This time, Sarah didn't drop the phone. She screenshot the message and then did something that probably wasn't smart but felt necessary. She texted back, "Who are you?" The response came immediately, "Someone who knows what you're looking for. And someone who knows you don't want to find it." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean? Your daughter's death wasn't an accident." The phone fell from Sarah's numb fingers. She stared at the message until the words blurred together, until she couldn't breathe, until the room started spinning around her. Emma. They were talking about Emma. She grabbed the phone and typed with shaking fingers, "What do you know about my daughter?" The drain wasn't loose. Someone made sure she wouldn't be able to get free. Sarah's vision went wide around the edges. She stumbled to the kitchen sink and vomited, her whole body shaking with rage and terror and grief so sharp it felt like dying. When she could see again, there was another message waiting, "Stop digging, or everyone will know what really happened to Emma." How long do you think before the police start asking why you were really so eager to destroy evidence? Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely type, "You're lying." Am I? Ask yourself why your neighbor was so determined to stop you from removing that pool. Ask yourself why Karen Henley was so quick to call the police. Ask yourself why she moved to Maple Street 3 weeks after Jenny Anderson disappeared. The world tilted on its axis. Sarah grabbed the kitchen counter to keep from falling, her mind racing through the timeline. If that was true, if Karen had moved here right after Jenny disappeared. Check the property records. Karen bought her house in August 2001. 2 months after Jenny's disappearance. 1 month before your house was built. Sarah fumbled with her laptop, her hands shaking so badly she could barely type. She pulled up the property records for Karen's house and stared at the screen in horror. Purchase date, August 15, 2001. 2 months after Jenny Anderson was last seen alive. Now do you understand why she was so eager to stop you? Sarah's phone was buzzing constantly now, message after message flooding in. She's been watching that pool for 20 years. Making sure no one got too curious. Making sure no one dug too deep. But you had to go and ruin everything. You had to start swinging that hammer. So she had to stop you. Just like she stopped Emma. Sarah was hyperventilating now, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. She tried to call 911, but her hands were shaking too badly to dial. The messages kept coming. "You want to know what happened to your daughter? Karen saw you starting to crack. Saw you questioning everything. She knew it was only a matter of time before you started digging. So she made sure you'd have other things to worry about. She made sure you'd be too broken to ask questions. She made sure Emma would never grow up to accidentally discover what's buried in your backyard." Sarah was on the floor now, the phone buzzing beside her ear like an angry wasp. She could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer, but they seemed far away and unreal. The final message was the worst of all, "Look outside. See who's watching you right now." Sarah forced herself to crawl to the window and peer through the blinds. The dark sedan was still there, but now she could see inside it clearly. A woman sat behind the wheel, her blonde hair gleaming in the dawn light, her phone pressed to her ear. Karen. Karen had been sitting outside Sarah's house all night, watching, waiting. Karen had been sending the messages. Karen had been there when Emma died. As Sarah watched, Karen ended her call and smiled. Even from across the street, Sarah could see that cold, satisfied expression. The same expression she'd worn yesterday when the police told Sarah to stop digging. Karen got out of her car and walked casually toward Sarah's house as if she were just taking a morning stroll. She paused at the mailbox and looked directly at the window where Sarah was hiding. Then she waved. The sirens were getting closer now, and Sarah could see Detective Rivera's unmarked car turning onto Maple Street. But Karen didn't seem worried. She just kept walking, heading toward her own house, her movements calm and unhurried. As if she had nothing to hide. As if she wasn't the one who had been terrorizing Sarah all night. As if she hadn't just confessed to murdering an 8-year-old girl. Sarah tried to stand, tried to run outside and scream the truth to Detective Rivera, but her legs wouldn't work. She could only lie there on the living room floor, clutching her phone, as Karen disappeared into her house and the police cars pulled up outside. When Detective Rivera knocked on the door, Sarah couldn't even get up to answer it. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Emma's last moments. Thinking about how Detective Rivera found Sarah curled up on her living room floor, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She was shaking so violently that at first he thought she was having a seizure. "Mrs. Martinez, are you injured?" Sarah looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. Detective Rivera was older than she'd expected, maybe 50, with graying hair and the kind of face that had learned not to show surprise. But even he seemed taken aback by whatever he saw in her expression. "She killed my daughter," Sarah whispered. I need you to slow down. Let's start with the threatening messages you received." Sarah held up her phone with trembling hands. "It's all here. Everything," she confessed. Detective Rivera took the phone and scrolled through the messages, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked at Sarah with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Martinez, these messages came from an unknown number. We'll need to trace them, but it was Karen. Karen Henley. She was parked outside my house all night, watching me. She sent those messages. You saw her sending them." "I saw her on the phone. I saw her smile at me. She knew I was watching." Detective Rivera made a note in his pad. "Okay. Let's talk about what you found in your backyard." Sarah led him outside, her legs still unsteady. The morning air was crisp and clean, but she could smell something underneath it, something that reminded her of the time a raccoon had died in her crawl space. Sweet and sickly and wrong. The top over the crater fluttered in the breeze like a flag of surrender. "I was just trying to remove the pool," Sarah said. "Emma drowned in it 3 months ago, and I couldn't stand looking at it anymore. But when I broke through the concrete, I found something." Detective Rivera pulled on latex gloves and moved the boards aside. He knelt beside the hole Sarah had made and peered into it, then reached down and gently brushed away some concrete dust. The metal was more visible now, a dull silver surface that definitely wasn't rebar or pipe. It was too smooth, too regular. Almost like a Jesus, Detective Rivera breathed. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "This is Rivera. I need a forensics team at 2450 Maple Street immediately. And call the coroner's office. We are going to need cadaver dogs." Sarah's knees gave out. She sat down hard on the patio, the concrete cold against her legs. "It's Jenny Anderson, isn't it?" Detective Rivera ended his call and looked at her sharply. "What do you know about Jenny Anderson?" "She disappeared in 2001. The year before my house was built. The year before this pool was installed." Sarah's voice was getting stronger now, fueled by rage. "And Karen Henley moved to this neighborhood 2 months after Jenny disappeared. How do you know that?" "I looked it up. Property records. Karen bought her house in August 2001. Sarah pointed across the yard to where Karen's kitchen window overlooked the pool area. She's been watching this spot for 22 years. Detective Rivera was quiet for a long moment, staring at the hole in the concrete. Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Yesterday, when you were removing this concrete, did you have any idea what you might find? Sarah stared at him. Are you asking if I knew there was a body buried under my pool? I'm asking if you had any reason to believe my daughter drowned in this pool 3 months ago, Sarah said, her voice flat. I found her floating face down in 3 feet of water. The medical examiner said she got her bathing suit caught on a loose drain cover and couldn't get free. It was ruled an accidental drowning. But you don't believe that? Sarah looked at the messages on her phone, still displayed on the screen. I did believe it. Until last night. Detective Rivera read the messages again, his frown deepening. Mrs. Martinez, these are very serious accusations. If someone really did harm your daughter, they did. Sarah's voice was steel now. And I know who. Based on anonymous text messages. Based on the fact that Karen was desperate to stop me from removing this pool. Based on the fact that she moved here right after Jenny Anderson disappeared. Based on the fact that she's been watching this yard for 22 years. Those are all circumstantial, then explain this. Sarah pulled up the property records on her phone. Karen bought her house for $60,000 below market value in August 2001. Why do you think it was so cheap? Detective Rivera looked at the screen, then at the hole in the concrete. Because the previous owner was eager to sell. Because whoever sold it to her knew what was buried here. And Karen knew too. The sound of sirens was getting closer. Detective Rivera stood up and brushed the concrete dust off his gloves. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to understand something. What we are looking at here could be nothing. Old construction debris, a septic tank, anything. And these messages could be from anyone, a neighbor, a prankster, someone who read about your daughter in the newspaper. But you don't believe that. Detective Rivera looked at her for a long moment. No. I don't. The forensics team arrived in a flurry of activity. Sarah watched from her kitchen window as they cordoned off the backyard with yellow tape and began carefully excavating around the metal object. She could see Karen's house across the yard, but the windows were dark and the curtains were drawn. Too dark for 8 in the morning. Detective Rivera came back inside an hour later, his expression grim. Mrs. Martinez, we found something. Sarah's heart stopped. What? It's a metal trunk. Old, maybe from the 1980s or 1990s. We are going to need to bring in heavy equipment to remove it safely. What's inside? We don't know yet. But. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There's a smell. Sarah closed her eyes. Jenny Anderson. We can't make that determination until we get the trunk open and examine the contents. But I will. Say this, we've contacted the Anderson family in Oregon. They are flying in tomorrow. What about Karen? What about her? Are you going to question her? Detective Rivera looked uncomfortable. Based on what evidence? Anonymous text messages and a property purchased 22 years ago. Based on the fact that she's been acting suspicious since yesterday. Based on the fact that she was so desperate to stop me from removing the pool that she called the police and made up lies about permits and public safety. Mrs. Martinez, she's been watching this pool for 22 years, Sarah said again. Making sure no one got too curious. Making sure no one dug too deep. Even if that's true, it doesn't prove she killed anyone. Sarah stared at him. Then what will it take? What will it take for you to believe that Karen Henley is a murderer? Before Detective Rivera could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Sarah opened it to find Karen standing on her porch, holding a casserole dish and wearing the most genuine-looking expression of concern Sarah had ever seen. Sarah, dear, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I know you're going through a terrible time and I shouldn't have called the police. I brought you some tuna casserole. Sarah stared at her neighbor, this woman who had possibly killed her daughter, who had definitely been terrorizing her all night, standing there with a casserole like nothing had happened. "I don't want your casserole, Karen." "Oh, don't be silly. You need to eat." Karen pushed past Sarah into the house, moving with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "You're looking so thin lately. Emma wouldn't want you to stop taking care of yourself." The sound of her daughter's name on Karen's lips made Sarah's vision go red. "Don't you dare say her name." "Sarah, honey, I know you're upset," but Karen stopped mid-sentence when she saw Detective Rivera standing in the kitchen doorway. "Oh. I didn't realize you had company." "I'm Detective Rivera with the Riverside Police Department." "And you are?" "Karen Henley. I live across the street." Karen's smile was perfect, warm, neighborly, completely innocent. "I was just checking on Sarah. We've all been so worried about her since the accident." "What accident would that be?" "Her daughter drowned in the pool 3 months ago. Such a terrible tragedy. Emma was such a sweet little girl." Detective Rivera's eyes sharpened. "Did you witness the drowning, Mrs. Henley?" "Oh, no. I was at work. I didn't find out until later that evening when I saw the ambulance." Karen's voice was exactly the right combination of sadness and concern. Sarah found her when she went to call Emma in for lunch. Can you imagine? The poor thing must have gotten her bathing suit caught on the drain. "Is that what happened?" "Well, that's what the medical examiner said. A terrible accident. These things happen so quickly with children." Sarah was staring at Karen in horrified fascination. This woman was a master manipulator, turning the conversation around, making herself sound like the concerned neighbor instead of the suspect. "Mrs. Henley," Detective Rivera said, "how long have you lived on Maple Street?" "Oh. Let me think. 22 years now. I moved here in 2001. Such a lovely neighborhood. Very quiet and safe." "What made you choose this particular street?" Karen's smile never wavered. "The price was right, and I loved the mature trees. Plus, it was close to my work at the insurance company." "You said you were at work when Emma drowned. Where do you work?" "I'm retired now, but I used to work at Riverside Insurance. I had the day off that day, actually, but I was running errands in town." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. Karen had lied. She'd said she was at work. Then immediately, the APB went out within minutes, but Karen Henley had a 22-year head start. Sarah sat in Detective Rivera's car, watching the forensics team carefully extract the metal trunk from beneath her pool. It had taken them 4 hours with specialized equipment, and now the trunk sat on her patio like an accusation, dark metal streaked with rust and concrete dust. "Don't look," Detective Rivera said gently. But Sarah couldn't stop looking. 22 years ago, someone had placed this trunk in the ground and poured concrete over it. 22 years ago, Jenny Anderson had walked home from her job at the ice cream shop and never been seen again. And Karen had been watching over the grave ever since. "Mrs. Martinez." Dr. Sarah Chen, the medical examiner, approached with the careful steps of someone carrying terrible news. "We've opened the trunk." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. "Is it her?" "We found human remains consistent with a teenage female. Dental records will confirm identity, but..." Dr. Chen hesitated. "There's more." "What do you mean?" "The body shows signs of blunt force trauma to the skull. This wasn't a natural death. Murder." Sarah had known it, but hearing it spoken aloud still hit her like a physical blow. "How long has she been there?" "Based on the decomposition and the condition of the clothing, I'd estimate 20 to 25 years. The concrete created an anaerobic environment that preserved more than we'd normally expect." Detective Rivera was taking notes, his expression grim. "Any other evidence in the trunk?" "A purse. Wallet still inside with a driver's license." Dr. Chen held up an evidence bag. "Jenny Marie Anderson, date of birth March 3, 1985. Sarah stared at the license photo through the plastic. Jenny looked so young, so hopeful. 16 years old and planning a future she'd never get to see. There's something else, Dr. Chen continued. We found jewelry. A necklace with an inscription. She held up another evidence bag. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a heart-shaped pendant. Sarah could just make out the engraving, "To Jenny, love always, Mom and Dad." Her parents gave that to her for her 16th birthday, Detective Rivera said quietly. 3 months before she disappeared. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number, "You should have stopped when I told you to." Detective Rivera saw the message over her shoulder. She's still using the same number. We can trace this. She's too smart for that, Sarah said. She's probably using burner phones, switching them out every few hours. Maybe, but she's making mistakes. Running was a mistake. That visit to your house this morning was a mistake. Killers who stay calm for decades tend to fall apart once they're exposed. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Check your daughter's autopsy report. Ask them to look for ligature marks on her ankles. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She's texting about Emma again. Detective Rivera read the message and immediately pulled out his own phone. Dr. Chen, I need you to re-examine the Martinez girls' autopsy photos. Look for anything that might indicate restraint marks. Detective, that case was closed months ago, I know. But we may have been wrong about the cause of death. Sarah could hear Dr. Chen's voice through the phone. I'll need to review the original examination, but if you're asking about restraint marks, I can tell you right now that wouldn't have been part of the standard drowning protocol. What do you mean? We look for signs of struggle, defensive wounds, things like that. But if someone was held underwater using restraints on the ankles or wrists, and those restraints were removed before the body was discovered. Dr. Chen's voice trailed off. We might have missed it. Sarah felt the world tilting around her. She tied Emma down. We don't know that yet, Detective Rivera said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah's phone buzzed a third time. She fought so hard. Just like Jenny did. But the water always wins in the end. Detective Rivera grabbed the phone and tried to call the number, but it went straight to voicemail. Damn it. She's turned it off. She's playing with us, Sarah said. She wants us to know what she did. She's proud of it. Or she's trying to distract us while she gets away. No. Sarah stood up, pacing to the edge of the crime scene tape. She's not running. She's been protecting this secret for 22 years. She's not going to give up now. Then where is she? Before Sarah could answer, Detective Rivera's radio crackled to life. Unit 47 to Detective Rivera. Go ahead. We found Karen Henley's vehicle abandoned at the Riverside Mall parking garage. No sign of the suspect, but we did find something interesting. What? A storage unit key taped under the dashboard. We are heading there now. Detective Rivera looked at Sarah. She's been planning this for a long time. Or she's leading us into a trap. 20 minutes later, they stood outside storage unit 247 at the Riverside self-storage facility. The manager, a nervous man in his 50s, fumbled with the bolt cutters as Detective Rivera and 2 uniformed officers waited. She's been renting this unit for 18 years, the manager said. Always paid in cash, always on time. Never caused any problems. The lock snapped and Detective Rivera pulled up the rolling door. The storage unit was like a shrine to murder. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about Jenny Anderson's disappearance, about Emma's drowning, about every missing person case in the county for the past 2 decades. There were maps of the neighborhood with various houses circled in red ink. There were photographs of Sarah's family, some taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. But it was the back wall that made Sarah's stomach turn. Dozens of Polaroid photographs were tacked to a corkboard, arranged in neat rows like a gallery of death. Sarah recognized some of the faces from missing person reports she'd seen over the years. Young women, mostly teenagers, all with the same look of terror in their eyes. And in the center of the board, larger than the rest, was a photo of Emma. She was tied to the pool drain with what looked like fishing line, her eyes wide with panic, water already covering her mouth. The photo had been taken from above, probably from Karen's bedroom window. Sarah collapsed to her knees. "Jesus Christ," one of the officers whispered. Detective Rivera was already on his radio, calling for backup, for the FBI, for anyone who could help process what they'd found. But Sarah couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. Karen had photographed Emma's murder. She'd stood at her window and watched an 8-year-old girl drown, and she'd taken pictures. "Mrs. Martinez." Detective Rivera knelt beside her. "I need you to look at something else." He pointed to a metal filing cabinet in the corner. The top drawer was slightly open, and Sarah could see files inside, each one labeled with a name and date. Anderson, Jenny, June 2001. Martinez, Emma, April 2025. And between them, at least a dozen other files. "She's been doing this for decades," Sarah whispered. Detective Rivera pulled out the Emma file with gloved hands. Inside were detailed notes about Sarah's family, about Emma's schedule, about the pool maintenance company that had accidentally installed a faulty drain cover 3 months before Emma's death. "She planned it," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "She planned my daughter's murder for months." "Why?" Detective Rivera asked. "What was her motive?" Sarah pointed to another section of the wall, where property records and real estate listings were pinned up like a battle plan. Every house on Maple Street was marked with notes about the owners, their financial situations, their family dynamics. "She's been buying up properties," Sarah realized. "Look at the dates. Every time someone moves away after a tragedy, Karen. Or one of her shell companies buys the house below market value." Detective Rivera studied the documents. "She's been creating her own personal graveyard. Making sure she controls who lives where, who might get curious about what's buried in their backyards." Sarah's phone buzzed one last time. "You found my collection. Impressive, isn't it? 23 years of work. But you're still missing the best part." Detective Rivera tried to trace the call, but again it went straight to voicemail. "Where is she?" Sarah looked at the photo of Emma, at her daughter's terrified face, and something cold and certain settled in her chest. "She's at my house." "What?" "She's been watching us this whole time. She knows we found the storage unit. She knows we found Jenny's body. And she knows there's one more thing we haven't found yet." "What?" Sarah was already running toward the car. "Emma's body." Detective Rivera caught up with her at the passenger door. "Mrs. Martinez, your daughter's body was recovered from the pool. She was buried 3 months ago." "No," Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. "What we buried was a prop." Karen switched the bodies. Detective Rivera stared at her. "That's impossible." "Is it?" She had access to the scene for hours before the coroner arrived. She works in insurance, she knows about forensics, about procedure. And she needed Emma's real body for her collection. The drive back to Maple Street took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. When they turned onto Sarah's street, they could see smoke rising from Karen's backyard. "She's destroying evidence," Detective Rivera said, calling for the fire department. But Sarah was looking at her own house, at the windows that reflected the afternoon sun like dead eyes. "No. She's destroying everything except what she wants us to find." They found the front door standing open. Inside, the living room had been transformed into a macabre museum. Emma's belongings were arranged on tables like exhibits. She vaulted over the crime scene tape, sprinted across her backyard, and crashed through the overgrown brush that separated her property from the old Anderson foundation. Behind her, she could hear Detective Rivera shouting for backup, for the fire department, for SWAT, but his voice seemed to come from another world. The only thing that mattered was the small, still form in Karen's arms. "Emma." Sarah stumbled down into the foundation, her feet sliding on loose concrete and 22 years of accumulated debris. The basement walls rose around her like a tomb. And she could smell gasoline so strong it made her eyes water. Karen stood in the center of what had once been the Anderson family's rec room, where Jenny had probably watched TV and done homework and dreamed about her future. Now it was a charnel house. Emma's body lay on a makeshift altar built from old boards and concrete blocks. She looked exactly as she had 3 months ago, perfectly preserved by some chemical process Sarah didn't want to understand. Around the altar, arranged in a careful circle, were 22 other bodies in various states of decay. 23 young women and girls, all of Karen's victims, all waiting for their final rest. "You came," Karen said, her voice warm and conversational, as if they were chatting over the fence. "I wasn't sure you would." "Let me take her home," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Please. Just let me take Emma home." "But she is home." "They all are." Karen gestured to the circle of bodies with the gasoline can. "This is where they belong. Where they've always belonged." Sarah took a step closer and Karen immediately raised the can. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Karen, please. She's just a little girl. She was a little girl. Now she's perfect. They are all perfect." Karen's eyes were bright with a fever that had nothing to do with illness. "Do you know how hard it is to find perfection in this world? How rare it is to capture that exact moment when innocence becomes something eternal. You're sick." "I'm an artist." Karen's voice turned sharp. "I create moments that last forever. I preserve beauty before it can be corrupted by time and experience. And disappointment." Sarah looked at the bodies around Emma and felt her sanity slipping. Some of them were old enough to be her classmates, preserved for decades in this underground crypt. Others were barely older than Emma, children who had disappeared from playgrounds and school buses and never been found. "Jenny was my first," Karen continued, following Sarah's gaze. "I was only 19 then, working at the ice cream shop where she had her summer job. She was so sweet, so trusting. When I offered to drive her home that night, she got right in my car." "Why?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Because she was perfect. Because she would never grow up to be bitter and cynical and cruel like the rest of us. Because I could keep her exactly as she was, forever. You kept her body for a year before you buried her. I kept her until I found the perfect place. This foundation was already here, already forgotten. All I had to do was wait for someone to build over it." Karen's smile was radiant with madness. "When I heard they were going to build houses on this lot, I knew it was meant to be. I buried Jenny here and moved into the house across the street to watch over her. And then you started killing others. I started saving others. 1 or 2 a year, sometimes more if I found someone particularly special. I learned to be more careful, more selective. I learned to make it look like accidents, like runaways, like random disappearances." Sarah's eyes fell on a small form near the back of the circle, and her heart stopped. The body was tiny, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing a faded princess dress. "That's Melissa Chen," Karen said, noticing her gaze. "She went missing from the county fair 8 years ago. Such a sweet little thing. She wanted to ride the carousel one more time." "You monster. I'm a preserver of innocence. I'm a guardian against the corruption of growing up." Karen's voice was getting louder now, more manic. "Do you know what happens to little girls like Emma if they are allowed to live? They become teenagers. They become bitter and angry and full of hate. They become women like you." Emma was 8 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Exactly. A whole life of disappointment and heartbreak and compromise. I saved her from all of that. Sarah could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. Detective Rivera would be organizing a perimeter, calling in specialists, doing everything by the book. But she knew it would be too late. Karen was past rational thought now, past negotiation. "You planned her murder for months," Sarah said, trying to keep Karen talking while she looked for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "I planned her salvation. I watched your family for 3 years before I decided Emma was ready. I studied her routines, her personality, her relationship with you. I made sure she trusted me." The pool drain. A masterpiece of engineering. The fishing line was invisible from above, but strong enough to hold a struggling child underwater. The drain cover was loose just enough to catch her bathing suit, but not loose enough to break free. Karen's eyes were shining with pride. She fought so beautifully. So desperately. It was like watching a butterfly try to escape a spider's web. Sarah lunged. She tackled Karen around the waist, sending them both crashing into the concrete wall. The gasoline can flew from Karen's hands, splashing its contents across the floor and the bodies. Karen was stronger than she looked, and 22 years of killing had given her experience with fighting for her life. She grabbed a chunk of concrete and swung it at Sarah's head, missing by inches. Sarah rolled away and came up with a piece of rebar in her hands. "You can't stop this," Karen snarled, scrambling for the gasoline can. "Even if you kill me, they'll never find all the bodies. There are others, buried all over the county. Dozens of them. Then tell me where they are. So you can destroy my life's work. So you can scatter my collection to the winds." Karen found the can and began splashing the remaining gasoline around the foundation. "Never." Sarah swung the rebar like a baseball bat, catching Karen across the shoulder and sending her spinning. But Karen kept moving, kept splashing gasoline, her movements becoming more frantic and desperate. "They deserve to be found," Sarah said, advancing with the rebar raised. "Their families deserve closure. Their families deserve to forget. To move on. To stop hoping for answers that will only bring them pain. Like you helped me move on. Like you helped me forget." Karen stopped moving. For the first time since Sarah had known her, she looked almost human. Almost sorry. "You were getting too close," she said quietly. "After Emma died, you started asking questions. Started looking at the drain, at the pool maintenance records, at the timeline. I could see you starting to doubt the official story. So you sent me those messages. You tried to drive me insane. I tried to distract you. To give you a bigger mystery to solve. If you found Jenny's body, I thought you'd be satisfied. I thought you'd stop digging. But I kept digging anyway. You kept digging anyway." Karen's smile was sad now, resigned. "You're stronger than I thought. Stronger than the others." "What others?" "The other mothers. Jenny's mother, Melissa's mother, all the others who lost children to me. They all eventually gave up. They all eventually stopped asking questions." Karen pulled something from her pocket, a cigarette lighter. "But not you." Sarah saw what was coming and threw herself toward Emma's body, trying to shield her daughter from the flames. But Karen was faster. She flicked the lighter and dropped it into the gasoline. The foundation erupted in fire. Sarah grabbed Emma's body and ran for the crumbling stairs, the flames licking at her heels. Behind her, she could hear Karen laughing, a sound of pure madness that rose above the roar of the fire. She made it halfway up the stairs before the explosion knocked her flat. When she came to, Detective Rivera was pulling her and Emma's body clear of the burning foundation. Firefighters were already hosing down the flames, but it was too late. The basement was an inferno, and everything inside it was burning. Including Karen. Sarah could see her silhouette through the flames, standing motionless in the center of the fire, surrounded by the bodies of her victims. She wasn't trying to escape. She wasn't even screaming. She was just standing there, watching her life's work burn. Watching her collection turn to ash. Is she? Sarah couldn't finish the question. "We'll recover what we can," Detective Rivera said gently. "But it's going to take time. And there might not be much left." Sarah looked down at Emma's body in her arms. Her daughter was finally coming home, but the cost had been almost too much to bear. 23 other families would never have this closure. 23 other children would remain missing, their bodies scattered across locations only Karen had known. She said there were others, Sarah told Detective Rivera. "Dozens of them, buried all over the county. We'll find them. However long it takes, we'll find them." But as Sarah watched the fire consume the Anderson Foundation, she knew that some secrets would burn with Karen. Some families would never know what happened to their children. Some questions would never be answered. The fire burned for 3 hours before it was finally extinguished. When the smoke cleared, they found Karen's remains in the exact center of the basement, her arms spread wide as if she were embracing the flames. In her right hand, melted almost beyond recognition, was a small heart-shaped locket. Jenny,